Pioneers. Today we're going to be making tomato basil soup. And in this stock pot I have peeled, seeded, and chopped about 5 pounds of Roma tomatoes. And this right here is frozen chicken broth. And it's approximately 2 cups of chicken broth. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to be adding some tomato puree. Now this is not tomato sauce, this is organic. And you could use tomato sauce if you wanted to. The tomato puree is processed differently. So you're going to get a finer texture of tomato. I've roughly chopped the Roma tomatoes and de-seeded them and put them in the stock pot, so I'm already going to have a little bit of chunkiness. So I really wanted to use a tomato puree because it's going to give a different type of texture. And this recipe is a very close copy to a restaurant we have here in Texas. It may be in some other states. It's called La Madeleine. And they do a really, really rich tomato basil soup, and they serve it with their sandwiches. You can have it on the side. I serve it with grilled cheese. That's our favorite way to have it. So we're going to pour in a 15-ounce can. I believe this is 15 ounces. I'll look once I pour it in here. This is the same tomato puree that I use for, it's 1 pound or 12 ounces, so it's 1 pound of tomatoes. I'm gonna add a little water just so I can rinse the can out. It's got some in it, and I'm gonna pour that in there. All right. The next ingredient, we're going to add is going to be tomato sauce. Tomato paste. And the reason I add tomato paste is because tomato paste is, the manufactured kind is manufactured with a little bit of sugar. So it's going to add a really nice sweetness to the tomato basil soup. And when you homemade or can your own tomato paste, you do add a little bit of a sweetener. Some people use honey, some people use, I think it's guava, some people use corn syrup. There's all types of ways to use this organic sweetener in tomato paste, and this is just an organic tomato paste. I'm only going to add about a half a can. All right. Our next ingredient we're going to add is going to be minced garlic. Now I reused this container. This is organic garlic. I got this at the grocery store, but I just keep reusing it because the plastic absorbs the garlic and you couldn't use this for anything else. So I just chop up my garlic. I add some olive oil, and that's how I keep the chopped garlic. It's so much cheaper to do it this way because you can buy a big container of organic garlic like this. This is probably a little over $4, maybe almost $5 for this entire thing. And one of these will probably make 2 of these that you can buy for way more money. So you're saving a little money and it's more healthy. So what I'm going to do is put I'm going to gauge about probably maybe a flat tablespoon of garlic. And then I'm going to move my stock pot, and I'm going to add some organic olive oil, and I'm just going to drizzle a little bit of olive oil in here. I'm also going to add some salt. I'm going to do 2 teaspoons of salt, and I'm using the kosher salt. You can always add salt. You can't take salt back out. So I always say start with a little bit, and then when you pour it in a bowl, then you can make your adjustments. I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of kosher salt, and this is also good. Canning salt is kosher salt, so same thing. Okay, let me get this stirred up in here. And then we need to add the lead of the show. This is organic basil that I got at a store here in Texas called Sprouts. And this is just fresh basil leaves. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to chop off the bottom of the stems because you don't want that. This will make it really bitter. If you ever stick the bottom of a stem where this has been in the ground, from a cucumber to lettuce, anything like that, this holds all the bitterness. So you want to always discard that. Okay, chop up your basil. And this is super strong. Fresh basil is really good for fresh pesto. So if you're making fresh pesto, you're always going to want to use fresh basil because of all the oils that come out and extract. It makes the pesto really, really potent. We're going to add that into our pot. And this basil is going to cook, you know, it's going to cook down. We don't want it to overpower with basil, but we do want the, you know, the basil flavor in there. You can always add it. Remember, you just can't take it back out once the flavor's in there. That's why when they say, you know, I cook to taste, that's the reason. People don't know how much. They just cook it and then they taste it and then they add as they go. Or that's the way I was taught. Okay. Now those basil leaves have been washed and dried. They weren't just fresh out of the package and dirty. They were washed. Okay, we're going to give this a little stir. And now, notoriously tomato basil soup has heavy cream in it. And there's a lot of people out there on YouTube and a lot of people that if you ask around about canning, they're going to tell you don't can anything with dairy in it. Don't can milk products. Well, my logical brain says that if you can buy canned milk, you can can canned milk. You can add canned milk to any recipe and you can use it for canning. My grandmother always used canned milk and things that called for can. This also makes it less calories. So heavy cream in tomato basil soup is going to add a lot of bulk, a lot of calories. It's going to make it creamy, but it's also going to add those calories that you probably don't need. So I'm going to add a can of evaporated milk to this. And we're going to cook up the tomato basil soup and we're going to can it. So they've already removed all of the dairy components. When I say dairy components, I mean like anything that would cause it to clabber or make cheese or any sort of fats that are going to congeal. They've removed that out of the milk, and that's what evaporated milk is. It's cooked milk. So I say you can absolutely can milk. So let's get started. I'm going to pour this can of evaporated milk into the stock pot. And then our last ingredients, you could add celery and bell pepper to this. I wouldn't, because that's really not the traditional way of making tomato basil soup the way that I'm trying to make it. But you would add onion. My husband is allergic to fresh onions, so we're going to use an organic dried onion. And the reason he's not allergic to dried onions is because they've removed all of the sulfur when you dehydrate these. And a raw onion out of the ground has an enormous amount of sulfur in it, and that's what he's allergic to. So I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle a little bit. I'm just going to do probably 2 tablespoons of, because this is dehydrated, remember, and it's concentrated. Okay, so we're going to open up our can. I think I'll do this. It's probably easier. And I think the expiration date on this canned milk is used before September 2016. So you could at least can this for 6 months. I mean, you could have canned tomato basil soup for at least 6 months. So the length of putting things in cans certainly shortens it, but you can it. I haven't mastered the ability to can chicken and dumplings yet, but I know there's an absolute way to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and add my evaporated milk. Get this to where you can see it. Maybe take the camera off. This is creamy, and what's going to happen is when we cook it over the stove, I'm going to cook it for probably 2 to 3 hours, and it's going to cook down everything, and you're going to see it won't be so white creamy. It's going to be a little, you're going to see a little bit more of the red texture. Okay, so when we come back, this will be ready to go on the stove to either eat or can up. So we'll be back. Okay guys, welcome back. I've got my tomato basil soup. See if I can move the camera. All ready to go into my canner. And this is going to be a really yummy, chunky tomato basil soup. It's got chunks of tomato and lots of basil in it, and garlic and onions. And because it has onions, I'm going to need to use the pressure cooker. Otherwise, if this was plain tomato soup with no vegetables in it, you could actually water bath can it. So for the purposes of the video, I'm going to be using only 4 of these wide mouth quart jars, and this is 2.5 cups. It's enough for 2 people per jar, a cup of soup. And what we use them for is I grilled cheese sandwiches, and then we have a cup of soup. So that's what we use them, and that's how we use them. Or this could serve 1 large bowl if you're not feeling well. This has chicken broth, remember, in it, and it could absolutely make you feel better if you had a cold or sore throat or something like that. 1 of these jars would be a large bowl of soup. So okay, I've got my pressure cooker water heating, and I've splashed a little bit of vinegar on the inside to make sure my jars don't get all cloudy and nasty. And I'm going to try to get this as close as I can to the pot here, and then I'll show you once I get the jar filled up. We're going to leave about a 1/2 inch head space. In my altitude, it's 10 pounds of pressure for about 30 minutes. So I have about 6 pounds of tomatoes that I've cooked in this the tomato basil soup. This is really, really good in the winter time. It's excellent in the winter time when you're, all that cold and flu season stuff's going around, and you really just, you really want something that's yummy, and maybe you just want a little grilled cheese or a few crackers or something like that. And we're always going to remember when you're canning, you're going to want to, I just take a little bit of the hot water that the lids are sitting in, and I'm going to wipe around the rims here. You're going to always remember to wipe your rims, because if there's any food, grease, or debris on that lid, it will not seal on you. And you'll have to take it apart and either recan it, or you'll have to eat it pretty quickly. Put it in the refrigerator and eat it. Okay. And remember, we have canned milk in this soup, so it's evaporated milk. And I think canned milk can be recanned. And I don't think it needs to last for 20 years or 5 years or 10 years. But I think most people eat, they're rotating their canned foods, and so there's what my jars look like. Okay, first jar into the water. Okay, second jar. because I don't use fresh onion, I could probably get away with doing these in the bath canner, the water bath canner. I did not use fresh onions, and there is fresh basil in here. But I've always used the pressure canner for any kind of vegetable soups, anything like that, you know, as a given. When in doubt, I always say, you know, just do what you think is the right thing to do. And it'll usually, you know, pay off. Okay. Jar number 2. You don't want to crank it down, you know, like really tight. You just want to make sure it's firm. It's firmly tight. We've already eaten some of this for dinner with our grilled cheeses. So this is, I'm basically just canning up what we have left. What I love about, you know, canning, if you think about it, when you're cooking any kind of liquids or soups or, you know, red beans and rice or anything like that, it's always good to go ahead and can instead of just stick it in the refrigerator, because how many of us put food in the refrigerator and we forget about it? I'm notorious for it. So it'll get stuck in the back of the refrigerator, and I'll forget that it's even back there, and then the food goes bad. So canning also allows that. It allows you to, you know, really take advantage of hanging on to your, you know, your foods and getting the most out of them instead of them being, you know, wasted. Again, just firm tight. You don't need to crank it down. I never let my husband screw those lids down, because he's, for some reason, I don't know what it is about men, but they think if you ask them to tighten something down, or they add too much to it, they put too much oomph into it, and that can really be dangerous in a canner. You don't want it super tight. Okay. This is our last jar for the video. I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of my jars, and when we come back, I'll have the canning will be completed, and the jars will be ready to cool down and put it into storage. And there's, you know, I like the ball jars, but Kerr makes a good canning jar. I know most canners don't really care what brand, they buy what's on sale. But that's what they look like. And they make really, really beautiful baskets for Christmas. So you could put a really beautiful label on here, use your inkjet printer, and pop a bow on the top, and they're great Christmas gifts. You know, in the wintertime, if you have a sick friend or something like that, they're really good for that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of my jars canned up, and when we come back, our jars will be already ready and out of the pressure canner. And again, 10 pounds of pressure is what my altitude says to use, and I'm going to pressure cook these for 30 minutes. And then I'm going to let them sit 30 minutes in the pressure cooker while the pressure cooker cools down, and then I will put them on a drying rack for the night, and in the morning I'll just put them in the storage. So when we come back, I'll pull them out of the canner and make sure all the lids are popped down. So we'll be back.